Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. It is time for the Bronx Buzz. This is where we do a BronxNet's a program on different journalists, different reporters, writers, and editors. And so you can find out what's going on behind the scenes, so to speak. And then in our second segment, we usually do some artists, and we have a wonderful exhibit going on at the Bronx Historical Society by some wonderful, legendary Bronx photographers, and they have a new twist this year, as a matter of fact. Nonetheless, let's go right over to our buddy Steve Nessen, who's over there at Gotham Nist, literally WNYC, who covers traffic and transportation for them. Always nice to see you, Stephen. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me back.
So you wrote this article, which was interesting because I hadn't seen it anywhere else, that Governor Hochul wants to lower congestion pricing from the $15 that was recommended, and that's what the original plan was. But you added the little component to the headline that said the process could take years. Tell me a little bit, we'll break it down, but tell me a little bit about what the governor is hoping to do.
So you probably recall Governor Hochul paused the tolling plan to charge drivers $15 a day to enter Manhattan below 60th Street. The rationale that she gave was that, well, inflation is causing, the cost of groceries and everything to be so high. And drivers right now can't do another high tax. They can't pay more for, what they expect, which is just to drive into the city. She spoke with what she said were people in diners, especially drivers from New Jersey, who said maybe they won't come to the city if it's $15. And that spooked her. She said, Manhattan's fragile post-pandemic recovery is still, we're still not quite there yet. So she doesn't want to make one more reason for people not to come to Manhattan, not to go to Broadway or go to restaurants or anything like that. That was her rationale. That's what she said publicly. And privately...
Let me just interject with that, because I believe we had this discussion way back when there was talk that politically coming up with the election coming up, that it might hurt Democrats if they added a quote unquote new tax. And obviously New York has a very big role in the national political scene. And so she didn't want to interfere with that.
Right.
Am I out of line for bringing that up?
No, absolutely. That's some of the private discussions that we've also reported on. Most notably, Hakeem Jeffries tapping on the governor's shoulder saying, hey, we've got some close races in the Hudson Valley and on Long Island that could really, change the composition of the House. They could flip the House if they win those. And he supposedly was worried that congestion pricing is going to be one of those things that might lose Democrats.
So then now, so her coming back, she said, I'm going to come up with the funding anyway, because we still desperately need the $15 billion that was promised to the MTA and mass transit. And so now what does she say?
So she was actually at the Democratic National Convention. She did an interview with Politico and referenced how in London they started the toll, more like started at £5, which actually we did, adjusted for inflation is actually about $14. But nevertheless, she cited starting at a lower toll rate and maybe gradually increasing it. So I wanted to know, how low can she go? What would be the lowest rate, and what would be the repercussions if it went, much lower? And the number I came out with was $9. And the reason $9 would probably be the lowest she would want to go is because all the study, all the planning, all the research that went into the MTA's tolling plan studied a range from $9 as the lowest to $23 as the highest. Ultimately they settled for something in the middle.
Right.
But if it goes below $9, they might have to start doing a bit more study, a bit more analysis with the federal government to analyze the impact if you only charge $9 or less. If it's much less, they would have to do, possibly more review. And also, as we spoke about before, there's court cases in New Jersey. They're being sued by the state of New Jersey and some other politicians over the tolling plan. So if they change the tolling rate to something below $9, the judge in that case might decide, well, you've changed it so much that, what we've been discussing maybe isn't relevant anymore. I am going to ask you to go back and do
and literally start again.
maybe not start from scratch because they've done a lot of the groundwork already, but they'll have to run a different computer analysis. And also that the tolling rate they chose was balanced just right to raise $1 billion a year, which is what the state legislation called for.
Right. And that was going to be my next question. So, okay, you said $15 and then we're getting $15 billion. If it's $9, I don't want to do the one-to-one equation, but then are we getting only $9 billion for the much needed upgrades for mass transit and the MTA?
Right. So part of the deal was if you charge, say, a little bit more, like $15, the MTA was going to give a tolling credit to drivers who use one of the crossings. Remember, they were going to get $5 off if you enter the Holland Tunnel, the Lincoln Tunnel, Queens Midtown. They were going to get that money back. So if it's a lower rate, maybe those toll rebates wouldn't be there. Or the other thing that the governor has spoken about is bringing it back to the legislature to maybe vote on and rewrite the congestion pricing law. That's something that we could be looking at come this January.
I'm exhausted. I don't know about you who has to cover this stuff. The among the many issues, not only funding the MTA, was traffic in New York City and trying to ease things up. I wonder what hurts the city economically worse is to have all that traffic and people say, the hell with it, and they don't come in. Or if, the traffic moves, but you do got to pay a little more. Right?
It's absolutely one of the arguments that make for congestion pricing is the millions of dollars lost in productivity because you're just stuck in traffic, hours of your life.
About it. You had mentioned just before we went on the air, now folks should know we're recording this Tuesday. It'll ultimately air on Thursday. You said there's something going on this afternoon.
That's right. The MTA is going to be giving reporters a preview of its next 5-year capital plan. Those are the laundry list of big spending projects that they want to embark on over the next 5 years. And, as we were just talking about congestion pricing, that was supposed to fund the last capital plan. So they still have something like a $16 billion hole in the last capital plan for projects that are on pause or on hold at the moment. But if that money from congestion pricing doesn't come in, all those projects are just going to get killed. So what are they going to do for the next 5 years if they don't have that money coming in? It's a big question, but they do have a lot of stuff they want to do.
It's a big question, and I wish it was for like a kind of a side project for the city rather than the central project of upgrading our subway and bus systems, which of course, so drastically need them. Unwittingly or wittingly, you have segued to your other article that I wanted to talk about. This was an enormous dollar, and the headline is, the MTA needs up to $92 billion for transit upgrades, maintenance through 2029. So it's not even that far in the future. It is really just, the next few years. Where did we get that $92 billion figure? And that, I guess, doesn't include the $15 billion hole in the agency's capital plan. Where does that $92 billion come from?
That's right. Well, that figure was put together by the comptroller, and it's based on sort of what the MTA calls its 20-year needs assessment. So, for example, it's already sort of put out a plan for what it needs for the next 20 years. So this is looking at what are the most immediate things that need to happen. These are things like buying new subway cars. These are things like shoring up the elevated tracks, making sure that those are all in a state of good repair, making sure that the railroad itself, the physical railroad, is in good condition, and they need to spend money on that every year to maintain it. That's state of good repair work. The MTA has also indicated it does want to move forward with the second phase of the Second Avenue subway, so that could be included as well. But we're going to find out for certain this week,
even later today,
what they're going to be doing. Are they going to proceed with that, or are they going to scale that back in light of a tough financial situation?
I hate to poke fun, but I don't really hate to poke fun because I do it often enough. But, it's like you go to the store and you say, well, what does this cost and what does this cost? What am I getting for my $15 billion? and what am I getting for my 92 billion? Is that $92 billion figure out of whack from what other people might have, in other words, what legislators might have thought as they begin negotiating what the MTA should get, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, it's a good question. I think certainly the legislators are going to be involved because they're going to have to make some tough choices on how to fund it. Are they going to increase the internet sales tax, for example, the payroll mobility tax, which they increased, just the other 2 years ago? They are going to have to find a way to fund it. If it's $92 billion, there's no way that the state general fund and the city are going to be able to shoulder all of those costs. So they're going to have to think about, sure, what are we going to get for our money? Is this what we should be spending our money on? And the figure could range anywhere between 60 billion and 92 billion, or as much as 107 billion, really, because like you said, congestion pricing money is still hasn't been resolved yet. So that hole is lingering.
Yeah, recently there was a lot of talk about cracking down on fare beaters. I mean, this is a new thing. There can't be, I realize, I mean, that's a whole other dialogue, but that can't provide enough money to fill some of these gaps. I mean, they may make some money.
It's less than $1 billion lost from fare evasion. And that's across all things, subways, buses, as well as the toll plaza where, people cover their plates and don't pay.
You mentioned a number of things, replacing cars and many of the other things. What do you think, and we're just about out of time, what do you think the system needs most? I mean, I ride the subways, I ride the buses. I mean, I'm a New Yorker. I could think of 100 things. If you, just for example, Steve Nessen was given $2 billion and said, what are you doing first? What are you doing first with let's just say the subway system?
Well, for the subways, I would definitely say the signals. Don't skimp on the signal replacement program, because riders who take the L train or the 7 train, for example, those are the only 2 lines in the entire subway system that have modern electronic signals. Wow. All the other signals date back to, the technology that was basically there when the subways began over 100 years ago.
When mom and dad Axelbank said to Gary, okay, you can ride by yourself. That's when, and even before that. Listen, Steve, we got to run. You are just fantastic. Your writing is fantastic. And all the people at Gothamist WNYC are really doing important stuff for us, including this dialogue about our subways and buses. And so covering traffic for Gothamist and NYC. It is Steve Nessen. Say hello to all my buddies over there, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me. Always a pleasure.
Take a short break, folks, and then when we come back, as I said, we're going to have a segment with some wonderful legacy photographs of the borough of the Bronx. Don't